Behind the man who changed the world stood a woman the world forgot. Welcome to Son.Mindfulness, where every story is a seed and every soul is worthy of blooming. Most people know the name Buddha. Fewer know the man behind the name, Prince Siddhartha. But almost no one knows the woman he left behind, Yasodhara. And yet, her story might just be the one that speaks to your own heart most clearly. Let's imagine this together. You're a young mother in ancient India. You live in a palace of gold, silk, and celebration. Your husband is a prince, handsome and wise. Your baby boy is healthy, beautiful. Your life is what many would call a dream. But one morning you wake up, and he's gone. Not off to war. Not taken, not dead. Just gone. By his own choice. Without a note, without a word. Your son cries in the next room, servants whisper in the halls, and the world that once adored you now questions you. Why did he leave? What did you do wrong? That woman was Yasodhara. But this isn't a story about being abandoned. It's not about heartbreak, not really. It's about what happens next. It's about how a woman transformed pain into power, shame into strength, and loneliness into wisdom. And in doing so, she became one of the most overlooked spiritual leaders in Buddhist history. At Son.Mindfulness, our mission is to bring you stories that nourish the heart and expand the soul. We believe that spirituality is not about escaping life. It's about understanding it more deeply. Not about leaving behind responsibility, but transforming how we carry it. Yasodhara's story reminds us that awakening doesn't belong only to monks or mystics. It can happen in a palace, in a kitchen, in a quiet room at night. Especially for those who've lived, who've known love, loss, betrayal, and endurance. Yasodhara shows that the path to enlightenment is not always in renouncing life. Sometimes it is found by embracing it completely. This video, this journey, is for women who stayed behind while others left. Men who wonder what strength in silence really looks like. Anyone who's ever had to rebuild after being broken. And those seeking not a perfect life, but a peaceful one. In this series, we will tell her story as it has never been told before. Not just through historical records, but through the lens of emotion, resilience, and personal growth. You will discover a princess who chose presence over performance. A wife who became a teacher, not because of what she lost, but because of who she became. A mother who raised a son alone, and later watched him become the youngest monk in Buddhist history. A woman who proved that enlightenment is not reserved for those who leave, but for those who transform. This is not just Yasodhara's story, it may be yours too, because maybe, just maybe, your pain is not your ending. Your silence is not your weakness. Your life, with all its scars, is still a doorway to awakening. Part 2. Life before loss. A princess, a wife, a mother. Sometimes the life that looks most perfect is the one most quietly falling apart. The palace glowed like a dream. Golden archways shimmered in the morning sun. Servants moved silently through marbled halls, adjusting silk curtains and preparing scented baths. Music played from the far garden, soft, serene, almost unreal. In the heart of it all was Yasodhara, a princess by birth, a queen by marriage. But more than that, a woman of rare mind and radiant grace. She was born into the Shakya clan, the same noble family as Prince Siddhartha. From childhood, she had shown herself to be more than just beautiful. She was brilliant, thoughtful, observant, unafraid to ask hard questions in rooms where women were expected only to smile. By the time she came of age, suitors from far kingdoms gathered in competition for her hand. Archery, swordplay, philosophy debates. It wasn't just the men being tested. Yasodhara too watched carefully, quietly. She would not be won like a trophy, she would choose. And she chose Siddhartha. Not for his title, not for his wealth, but for a stillness she saw in his eyes, a mystery she couldn't yet name. Their marriage was the kind of love story sung by poets. 3 palaces were built for them, one for each season. They dined under moonlit skies, surrounded by music and flowers. When Yasodhara became pregnant, the kingdom celebrated for weeks. And when their son Rahula was born, it seemed that every prayer had been answered. She held him in her arms and whispered lullabies from her childhood. She watched her husband smile, hold their child, and gaze at the stars in long, thoughtful silences. On the outside, it was perfect. Noticed things. She noticed how Siddhartha's eyes sometimes drifted far away, how his hands trembled ever so slightly when he touched his son's tiny fingers, how he would ask sudden questions at dinner. Why do people suffer? Why do the old die in loneliness? Why does love always bring fear of loss? She answered when she could. But many times he did not want answers. He wanted space. Yasodhara did not panic. She did not press. She simply watched. There's a kind of wisdom that comes from being both deeply loving and quietly observant. Yasodhara had that. She understood that something was shifting in her husband. The palace was full of celebration, but he was full of sorrow. And yet, she hoped. She hoped their love would anchor him, that the smile of his child would soften the weight in his heart, that perhaps the quietness in him was just a phase. After all, wasn't he a prince, a father, a husband? Surely that was enough. She didn't know then that sometimes a soul is called to leave behind everything, even love, in order to discover truth. She didn't know that the man she had built her world around would walk away from it all without telling her why. She didn't know that her own journey, her own awakening, would begin not through comfort but through collapse. But that was later. For now, in those soft golden days, she lived as a woman fully present, holding her child, smiling at her husband's distant eyes, carrying the palace with both elegance and quiet fear. Because deep inside her, a whisper had begun. What if this life is not mine to keep? She didn't yet understand the question, but she would. All too soon. Part 3. The Night of Abandonment. Silence louder than words. Some departures are not loud, they're silent enough to shatter everything. It was a night like any other. The lamps in the palace burned low. Outside, the breeze rustled through silk curtains. Inside, all was still. Yasodhara lay beside her husband, the warmth of their son cradled between them. She felt safe, not joyful, not entirely. That feeling had been fading for some time. But safe. And for a woman in her world, safety meant everything. She didn't know that this night would be the last night she would ever see him as her husband. Siddhartha did not sleep. He sat upright long after Yasodhara had drifted into rest. He watched his child breathe. He looked at the woman who had loved him without question. Some say he leaned in close, wanting to kiss her forehead goodbye. Some say he nearly spoke, but swallowed the words. Others say he turned away in silence. All we know is that, in the darkest hour before dawn, he rose, stepped out of the room, mounted his horse, and disappeared. No letter, no farewell, not even a whisper to the woman who had given him everything. When Yasodhara awoke, something felt hollow. She reached out, an empty space. She sat up, called his name, once, twice. The room stayed silent. She searched the palace, first calmly, then desperately. She asked the guards, the servants, the monks. No one had answers. Some avoided her eyes, some bowed too quickly. And then came the truth. Or something close to it. He has left. He has renounced the world. Her ears heard the words, but her body refused them. She stood still like a statue, as her child's cries echoed from another room. In the weeks that followed, silence became her only companion. There was no explanation, no public statement, no guidance from the elders. The future king had walked away from his throne, from his duty, from his wife, from his child. And Yasodhara? She remained, not as a queen, not as a symbol, but as a mother, a woman, alone. In ancient India, a woman without her husband was not seen as a survivor. She was seen as shameful. Some whispered that she had driven him away. Others guessed he had gone mad. A few said he must have been captured. But no one, not even her, could fully answer the question she woke with every morning. Why didn't he say goodbye? Still, Yasodhara did not collapse. Yes, she cried. Yes, she grieved. But she did not vanish into bitterness. She rose. She bathed her child. She held her head high in public, even as others lowered theirs in pity. And each night, after Rahula had fallen asleep, she would walk alone through the empty corridors, listening to the echo of footsteps that no longer returned. There is a kind of suffering that doesn't come with bruises or noise. It comes with the absence of answers, with the heaviness of being left out of someone else's spiritual journey. And yet, it was from this very void that Yasodhara's true journey was about to begin. He left to find truth, she whispered one night to herself. Then let me find truth here, in what he left behind. Part 4. Rebirth through Solitude, Yasodhara's inner journey. Some women are not broken by abandonment, they are born from it. The seasons changed, years passed like mist, not with storms but with a slow, steady unraveling. Yasodhara stayed in the palace, not because she was waiting, not because she hoped he'd return, but because she had a child to raise and a soul to rescue, her own. At first she functioned. She did what mothers do. She fed Rahula, brushed his hair, told him stories when he asked, "Where is father?" She said only, "He is walking a path. One day, you will walk your own." Behind the grace, there was grief. But grief, when walked through slowly, becomes something else, something stronger. The halls once filled with musicians now echoed with silence. The silks and gold that had once brought her pride now felt useless, like decorations in a forgotten room. She stopped attending the royal ceremonies. She withdrew from the endless performances of court life, not in depression, in clarity. "I have seen what cannot hold me," she once told a handmaiden. "Now I must see what might free me." And so she began to wander, not through cities, but through temples, not in search of him, but in search of what he was searching for. She would sit quietly beside the monks, eyes closed, asking nothing, demanding nothing. No longer a queen, no longer a wife, simply a seeker. Some of the monks laughed behind her back. "A woman cannot understand the Dharma. She's here to chase a man, not the truth." But she said nothing. Because Yasodhara knew something they didn't. Pain is a faster teacher than comfort. She had walked through betrayal, public shame, spiritual abandonment, and she was still standing. Not just standing, transforming. With time, she let go of the silks. She wore white. She gave away her ornaments. She stopped wearing perfume. The woman once known for her beauty now radiated something else. Presence, stillness, grace that had nothing to prove. During those long years, some say 6, others say 12, rumors reached her. Strange whispers from merchants, a holy man in the forest, a teacher speaking of suffering and peace, a monk with eyes like fire and calm like ocean. She dismissed them at first. After all, spiritual teachers were everywhere in India. Wanderers, ascetics, sages. But one night, a traveling monk arrived at the palace and spoke these words. "There is a man called the Buddha, the awakened one. He says all suffering begins with attachment and ends with insight. He teaches that nothing, not beauty, not sorrow, not love, is forever." They say he was once a prince from the Shakya clan. And with that, Yasodhara's world stopped. Not because she was angry, not because she wanted him back, but because she realized, "I am no longer the woman he left, and he is no longer the man who left me." What she felt next was not revenge. It was not relief. It was something deeper, something like peace. Because now her path was no longer about him. She wasn't chasing a lost love. She was walking toward a found truth. "He found awakening through leaving," she whispered to the moon. "Then let me find mine through staying." And so she did. In the stillness of motherhood, in the emptiness of once crowded halls, in the echo of a love that once defined her, now dissolved. Yasodhara was not waiting anymore. She was becoming. Part 5. The return, but not the reunion she deserved. Sometimes the one who left returns, but you're no longer the one they left behind. The day he came back, the entire kingdom buzzed like a hive of reborn hope. The prince had returned, but not as a king, as the Buddha. The news moved fast. Monks whispered it at temple gates. Servants passed it like wildfire through palace corridors. Even the king, old and tired now, stood up from his throne for the first time in weeks. Drums were ordered, garlands prepared. The royal roads swept clean, not for war, not for conquest, but for a man of peace. Everyone prepared to welcome him. Everyone, except Yasodhara. She stood at her chamber window, watching the roads below fill with flowers and voices, but her face remained calm, still, like a mountain that had survived many storms. The other royal family members asked, "Will you not go to greet him? Do you not wish to see your husband?" And she answered softly, "If he is truly awakened, he will understand why I wait." She did not run, she did not cry, she did not decorate herself, she stayed, not in defiance, not in coldness, but in integrity. Because the woman he left no longer existed. Later that day, when the excitement of the city had begun to settle, she heard quiet footsteps in the corridor. Not hurried, not grand, just human. The door opened and he entered. He wore no gold, no silks, just a simple robe. His head was shaved, his eyes, deeper than before, gentler than memory. There was silence between them. Not the silence of strangers, not the silence of guilt, but the silence of two souls who had walked to the edge of themselves and returned different. He looked at her. She looked at him. No words, because what could be said? "I'm sorry" was too small. "I understand now" was too late. "And I still love you" belonged to a past that had already been released. But in that stillness, there was something sacred, a recognition. "You found truth by letting go," her eyes seemed to say, "and I found mine by holding on." Both paths had led them here, not to resume a marriage, but to acknowledge a transformation. He had gone to the forest to lose his self. She had stayed in the palace to find her strength, and then came the final piece of the story, the one he had never seen, the child he had left behind. Rahula, 7 years old now, standing behind a curtain, quiet, curious, wide-eyed. The father and son looked at one another, strangers with shared blood. It wasn't a movie ending. There were no embraces, no tears, just a moment of recognition, a thread pulling 2 lifetimes together. Later, Yasodhara sat alone under the Bodhi tree in the palace courtyard. She wasn't weeping, she wasn't shaking, she was still. Not because the pain was gone, but because it no longer controlled her. He left to seek freedom, she thought. But I stayed to learn how to carry the weight of love. In that moment, she made a quiet decision. She would not live in his shadow, nor in his legacy. She would walk the path beside it, not behind it. Not to follow her husband, but to follow the truth he himself had sought, even if it meant rewriting the rules. Part 6. A Quiet Revolution. Women demanding spiritual equality. When they told her there was no path, she built one. Yasodhara had changed, not just in her dress or her routine or her role in the palace, but in the way she walked through the world. No longer as someone waiting to be seen, but as someone who had already seen enough. She began spending more time in quiet meditation. She no longer attended court events unless required. And though her love for Rahula remained fierce, she also understood that her journey was not over. It was only shifting. There was something calling her. Not out of grief, not out of longing for Siddhartha, but out of a deeper truth rising within her. If awakening is possible for him, why not for me? But there was a problem. The Buddha had created a community, a sangha, for those who wished to follow the path of renunciation. But it was only for men. Women were not permitted to ordain, not because they lacked wisdom, but because tradition said so. And tradition in those days was law. Still, Yasodhara did not bow to it. She had once been a princess, once a wife, now a mother, always a seeker. And now she would become something new, a woman who dared to ask for her place in spiritual life. She wasn't alone. By her side stood Mahapajapati Gautami, Siddhartha's stepmother, the woman who had raised him like her own. Together, along with other noble women, they made a request. Let us join the Sangha. Let us walk the path. Let us awaken, not as followers, but as equals. The Buddha said no, not once, not twice, but 3 times. Most would have stopped there. But not Yasodhara, not Mahapajapati. Instead, they did something that had never been done. They shaved their heads. They put on the yellow robes. They left the palace barefoot and walked to the monastery gates. Picture the scene. A line of women, once adorned in jewels, now radiant in simplicity, standing before a monastery built for men, asking not for permission, but for acknowledgement. The Buddha hesitated again. But then his cousin Ananda spoke. Great teacher, is it not true that women too can attain enlightenment? The Buddha was silent. Then he nodded. And just like that, history shifted. The Bhikkhuni Sangha was born, the first community of fully ordained Buddhist nuns. And Yasodhara, the woman once defined only as Buddha's wife, became one of its earliest torchbearers. But she did not join to be near Siddhartha. She did not join out of nostalgia. She joined because something inside her had awakened, a fire, a clarity, a knowing that the Dharma does not belong to gender, it belongs to truth. She spoke little in public. But the early scriptures remember her voice, especially in the Therigatha, the verses of the elder nuns. In one of her recorded poems she writes, I have cut off my hair, I wear the yellow robe. Once praised for my beauty, I now seek no praise. I live by alms, I am free. Yasodhara wasn't just challenging gender norms, she was expanding the very definition of spiritual power. She taught other women not to shrink, not to wait for approval, but to step onto the path with their full presence. She didn't teach through sermons, she taught through silence, through being, through example. Her life whispered to every woman who felt unseen. You are not an afterthought in the story of awakening. You are part of its foundation. And she didn't stop with herself. She helped hundreds of women find their voices, not in rebellion, but in realization. She showed them that you can be abandoned and still belong, that you can be dismissed and still matter. That awakening isn't about where you start, but about what you dare to become. Yasodhara never claimed to be a teacher, but by simply being, she taught more than most ever will. Part 7. Her Legacy. A lesson for those left behind. Your pain is not your prison, it's your practice. History often forgets women like Yasodhara. Their stories are not written in stone. They're whispered in corners, hidden between the lines of men's achievements, tucked quietly beneath titles like wife, mother, supporting character. But Yasodhara was never just a background figure in the Buddha's story. She was the mirror he left behind, and the one that still reflects something we all need to see. Her name doesn't open textbooks, her image doesn't sit on altars, but in the silence of her transformation, she gave us something essential. A different blueprint for spiritual awakening. Not dramatic, not heroic in the loud sense, but profound. Because while Siddhartha walked into the forest to let go, Yasodhara stayed behind and let go anyway. She turned heartbreak into clarity, loneliness into compassion, abandonment into spiritual independence. She didn't chase after enlightenment, she embodied it. And when her time came, some say she achieved arahantship, full liberation, just like the Buddha himself. Not because she was his wife, but because she walked her own path, quietly, gracefully, persistently. So why don't we know her name? Why isn't Yasodhara mentioned in the same breath as Siddhartha? The truth is hard. Early Buddhist texts were carried forward by monks, by men. And for centuries, the stories of women were reduced, softened, or erased entirely. Yasodhara was remembered as the one he left behind, but not as the one who rose anyway. And yet, her legacy survives, in verses, in oral stories, and in women around the world who've had to start again after someone walked away. She is there when a mother raises her child alone, with quiet strength. She is there when a widow turns to prayer, not bitterness. She is there when a woman walks into a temple, not for tradition, but for truth. She is there when you ask yourself, can I survive this? Is this the end of my story? Who am I without the roles others gave me? And somewhere, perhaps from across centuries, Yasodhara's voice answers, you are not broken. You are becoming. Her story matters not because it ends in reunion. It doesn't. It matters because it begins again, each time someone chooses presence over performance, truth over tradition, and healing over hiding. At Son.Mindfulness, we believe that spiritual awakening is not just for monks in forests. It's for mothers at home, for elders who've outlived their roles, for anyone brave enough to transform suffering instead of running from it. So what can we learn from Yasodhara? Perhaps this, that the people who leave us are not the authors of our story, that silence can be a teacher, that beauty fades, but presence never does, that even in the absence of answers, you can still awaken. Your suffering is not your identity, your story isn't over, it's still being written. If you've ever felt forgotten, if you've ever been the one left behind, if you've ever asked what now, then you're already walking Yasodhara's path. And maybe, just maybe, that path leads not away from yourself, but finally, back home. Stay curious, stay wise, and stay kind with yourself. Your awakening, like hers, may not come with thunder. It may come in stillness, in surrender, in solitude, but it will come. And when it does, may you rise like Yasodhara. Conclusion. After her silence, our beginning, Yasodhara didn't chase the man who left her. She walked deeper into the woman she was becoming. She stayed. She stood. She awakened. Not by leaving, but by transforming. She turned sorrow into silence, then turned silence into strength. She showed us, being left behind doesn't make you less. It might be where you begin again. She didn't need titles, praise, or permission. She needed only truth, and her own quiet courage. Isn't that something we can all learn from? Have you ever been left in silence? Did it break you, or did it build you? Can pain become practice? Can waiting become wisdom? What if the story you thought was ending was simply life asking you to begin again? If this story moved something in you, even just a little, that's worth honoring. Because awakening doesn't come with fireworks. It comes with noticing, with breathing, with choosing not to close your heart. We want to thank you, truly, for staying with this story, for walking alongside Yasodhara, and for giving her voice the space to speak again. You could have been anywhere, but you chose to be here. That means more than you know. Now the most important part. What will you carry forward? Will you forgive something that still hurts? Will you let go of what no longer fits? Will you stay, not out of fear, but out of love? Tell us in the comments. What part of her story touched you most? Have you ever been the one who stayed? Have you ever found peace after being left? Let's talk together, gently, honestly, like old friends. And if this spoke to your heart, please like, subscribe, and follow our channel, Son.Mindfulness. We share more stories like this. Quiet stories, formative stories that remind you, you're not alone, you're not forgotten, you're still becoming. Thank you for being here. May you be healthy. May you be peaceful. May happiness find you in small, beautiful ways. And above all, may you remember, your story is still being written. And like Yasodhara, it's more powerful than anyone ever told you. With deep gratitude, the Son.Mindfulness. Thank you.